Hello and welcome to another episode of the Philip Wylie Show. Today I have Ryan Pullen from the UK joining me today. We've been connected on LinkedIn and recently discussed having Ryan on the show. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So how is not so much of a new year anymore since we're into like the second quarter. So how are things going for you and personally and business wise?
Yeah, really good. It's a busy period coming out of the kind of start of the new financial year and all the new work kind of getting booked in, if you like. And so we've had quite a few new clients coming in into our managed services, and so keeping busy, keeping busy. And
Oh,
obviously, we are a Microsoft security practice, and so with the release of Copilot and Copilot for Security, and what does that represent? It's been an interesting time, to say the least.
very cool. Yeah, it's very interesting to see how security's evolved. And, just from my time, I've got my first security role in January 2004, and it's evolved a lot since then. But just the past 3 to 5 years is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. I think if you go back 5 years ago, there probably weren't that many organizations that had a robust penetration testing schedule, understood what adversary simulations were, understood what a SOC was. And I think, 2015 onwards, in the last kind of 10 years, lots has really progressed in those directions. So yeah, it's from when I first started, it's I actually started within the defensive pathway and then moved into the offensive pathway, and then it was more directionally consultative. And I think now there's very few people that actually do that because like the talent pool is so much larger. There's so much more, kind of formal education. I mean, yourself included, educating people on different kind of techniques, etc. But now most universities have some kind of computer science led course with cybersecurity attached to it, if not a specific, we're going to look at this part of cybersecurity and specialize in it. So yeah, it's certainly changed significantly over that time frame from when you started, at least.
Yeah. So what I usually have my guests share their hacker origin story. So if you could kind of share how you got started up until your role today.
Sure. Wow. Okay. So this is a journey. So my journey is a little bit different to, well, I'm sure most people would say their journey is a little bit different to what you might expect. But I, after leaving school being high school for US people, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was taught that university was the path that I should go down, but I wasn't 100% sure. I'm not academic in nature, much of a doer, kind of take things apart, see how things work, kind of mind. And so I applied to university, and I started doing a digital forensics degree, um, but it wasn't for me. The first year was quite generalistic, built for people that what wanted to explore separate avenues. And for me, I was very specific in what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it, which was focused towards kind of fighting the good fight, if you like, finding issues or doing investigations, to really close out investigations that hadn't been closed before potentially. And that was kind of my mindset at the time. And so I went to university, and then I left a few months later, did some traveling, soul searching, whatever whatever you like, to try and understand where I wanted to go. And while I was traveling, my mum found a job application on Gumtree, which in the UK is like Craigslist, and which is a very weird place to find a job, right? And it just so happens I applied. I interviewed over Skype before remote interviews were a thing, before what we're doing now was a thing. And the person who was interviewing me just so happened to recognize my family name and had worked with my dad many years prior, or something like that. Right place, right time. And that was a cybersecurity company. And so where I wanted to specialize in digital forensics to be able to conduct investigations specifically around child exploitation, that was my cause, if you like, uh, led to me going down that pathway, specializing in mobile forensics and Mac OS. I did that for a couple of years. Then I picked up the kind of hacker pathway as you described, but not only technical, it was also physical as well. And so there's lots of social engineering, lots of physical red teaming, breaking into separate buildings and things like that. Did that for a few more years, and then it was instant response. And so I did instant response as well, kind of bringing in all of the separate narratives of how these attacks can take place. What does that mean for a business, and what does that actually mean when you can translate it from technical acumen into business speak, and helping people navigate through that. Skip forwards a few years and doing some cool jobs. One of the coolest jobs I did was on a super yacht. Got to travel around, did some cool things in the Middle East, and led to meeting some cool people along the way, one of which is the company I work at now. And now I'm, a board member there, which is very different to where I was originating. So I was doing professional services, and then I worked in the big finance world after that, which was kind of like your big four consultancy, just kind of quite focused, quite point in time, directionable engagements, to where I am now, which is 24/7 security operations led security engagements within the SOC. We also do adversarial, emulation work within our penetration testing team, and we also have a managed IT service, which is you keep your lights on, service desk sysadmin side of things. So quite the journey, but realistically taking the right opportunities and muddling through at the right times. And that's what I try and tell people. There's no specific pathway, because I think if someone was to go and watch all of your podcasts back, you've spoken to quite a few people in the industry and some big names. Everybody's journey starts with, well, I was playing with this and this was interesting to me and I didn't want to put it down. I don't know about you, but that was the same for me. And kind of once you've got that bug, you don't really want to put it down. And then for me, when I find that I can help other people on the back end of it, that brings my kind of job satisfaction.
Yeah, very cool background. And one of the things about the podcast is so many people that listen are trying to get started, or they're trying to move in from IT or other areas
Mm.
into cybersecurity. So it's interesting to hear the different stories, and they really help encourage people. I've ran into people that listen to the podcast that the stories that they hear on here encourage them. Sometimes people have a similar background, but I really like the fact that you shared how one of the jobs it helped because the connection with the person at the company. And that's one of the things I'm always telling people is to network. If anything else, if nothing else, make sure you're networking and talking to people in person, because there's a lot of cases where people will go to cybersecurity meetups or conferences and it just kind of set off in the corner by themselves quietly, and that's not really helping. You talk to
Mm.
someone, it's just kind of interesting sometimes if your personality really fits with the organization or the person you're talking to. They see that potential. Maybe you don't have the experience and background needed, but they kind of, from talking to you, get a sense of your people skills and just whether they think you're a fit for the team. So you just never can tell, just like in your
I couldn't
situation.
agree more. I literally couldn't agree more with what you're saying. I gave a talk at B-Sides in my hometown recently, and I hired someone from that talk 6 weeks later, because for me, exactly as you said, once you understand people's why they want to do it, what their cause is, and not necessarily what experience or exposure or technical skills you may have, depending on the discipline, of course, is a relative scale. But with that, the likelihood of you doing so, or you knowing someone and them introducing so and so to you, really, really dramatically changes it. And in a landscape where most cybersecurity roles now, unless you're in a government listed facility or doing something classified, are remote working of some description, whether if it's hybrid or fully remote. Now, when you're in a fully remote candidate pool, you really have to stand out. Because, when I'm hiring, and I'm not sure if it's similar in your experience, but I've been hiring for certain roles and I've had 2,000 applications. Now, with the best will in the world, I'm not going to be able to read 2,000 CVs. And so
Mhm.
you're going to do some kind of screening in some way. And the most kind of direct approach for me is someone's spoken to my sales team in the past. I'm not recommending this, but they've got some message through somehow which shows that level of tenacity and that level of kind of persistence. And so networking is absolutely key. I met you know the directors at Stripe OLT, where I am now, on an incident many years ago, many years before I even started working here. Because then what happened was I left that job to go to another professional services firm. I was on another ransomware attack job, and I needed some people that I trusted. So I phoned them up. They came along, and I worked with them for another 6 months, sorting the business out because I was doing instant response at the time. So I was in the advisory capacity, helping the board and kind of advising on different strategies for where we can get from point A to point B and restoration. And they were the people that came in and did some assistance. The business has changed quite significantly since then, obviously with a fully fledged cyber practice now. But meeting people and shaking hands, as intimidating as that can be, and I understand that, I feel intimidated when I go to conferences. And sometimes, now this is getting quite specific, even sometimes when I've been a speaker at a conference, I've not wanted to do the networking piece and socializing piece because I've not known many people, and it's entering into a new arena that you might feel uncomfortable within. But I think once you cross that barrier and you get over that first hurdle, it's one of the most welcoming communities that I've experienced, because everybody at the end of the day is kind of in the same race, but in their own lane and wants to help each other. Just like, advice and some of the tutoring and education pieces of content that you put out. Now, that doesn't necessarily benefit you specifically, but it benefits other people. And then at some point in time, that will reciprocate, I would imagine. So I couldn't agree more. Networking is key, uh, especially for people trying to get their foot on the ladder.
Yeah, just to kind of also tell people too is when you get out there and you meet your people, your tribe, it's a lot more comfortable
Yeah,
networking. So if you put me in a room full of lawyers or CEOs or business folks, I would feel out of place. But you put me in a room full of security professionals, then I feel at home and I'm more comfortable because we're
100%.
speaking the same language. So I think it's something people really need to take in consideration when they're going out there and networking.
Absolutely. And you also get a bit of everything, right? So if you're going to RSA, for example, you're going to have everything. And also every other night, there's going to be another sub little mini conference where there's something specific, whether if it's AppSec or OSIN or whatever it is. And so you can find people, within a niche of a niche, if you like, if that's, where you're struggling potentially. Because I mean, when I started trying to get into the speaking world and um, put myself out there a bit, basically I did it as a New Year's resolution because I wanted to push my own comfort zones, because in day to day I was quite comfortable. I'll speak to anybody about an engagement or why they should do certain things or security awareness program or whatever. But when you're speaking to a generalized audience and you don't know who's there, and people with many more years experience, it can feel really uncomfortable at certain times. And I think it allows you to push your boundaries and think about what you're going to say and who you interact with. So completely agree.
So for someone who wanted to get started speaking, what would you recommend?
Goodness me. For me, it was coming out of lockdown, so it was coming out of COVID, and I wanted to. I was looking at other people in the industry that I respected, and they were taking complex topics and really summarizing them into digestible segments. So anybody in business, regardless if you're a small, very small company, maybe a marketing agency or something, right the way up to the, your global enterprises, being able to take the same concept and apply it in their own way. For me, it was jump in the deep end. And so I had never done any public speaking. And I thought, okay, where do I start? And I had heard of TED Talks before. And so I went and watched all of the TED Talks and understood a bit about what that represented and what the goal was for a TED Talk and for it to be educational and, technologically focused. And so then I read the book on how to give a TED Talk by Chris Anderson, who's the head of TED. And that kind of gave me a few pointers, if you like. There's nothing that's going to remove the social anxiety of getting up on stage and, flashlights in your face where you can't see the crowd or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I threw my application in and I got it. And so then all of a sudden I had 6 months to write a talk that I thought was going to be interesting. And I wrote it 4 times and practiced it many, many times, because for me, starting out, my first ever actual public speaking engagement was to an audience of all disciplines. So nobody was from a security culture. And so when you're speaking B-sides, you can assume a certain level of understanding or technical knowledge, or that they're going to understand what certain acronyms mean. But for this one, it was completely different, which for me, I think was actually beneficial, because now I do lots of kind of security engagements with companies, and I go and speak to their teams and will educate on certain topics that might be, quite prevalent at this moment in time. But for starting out, I'd say jump in the deep end and speak what your experience is, because no one can relive your experience, and it can't really be invalidated in that way. And so if you give your experience across, whether if people agree with it or not, it's going to give a different perspective.
Yeah, very very interesting approach that you took there. So that that's a good, I would say a good starting point is to use the TED Talk type of resources, because it's kind of pretty high, pretty. You have to be pretty skilled to do that, and really have to put out polished talk. So that's pretty amazing accomplishment. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an interesting journey, to be honest, because when I was actually doing the research, they were just starting to publish the content for we're going to be looking for speakers, etc., etc. Contacted the team on LinkedIn and I said, "What are you looking for?" And the topic was around forging futures, which is something that you can liken cybersecurity to for sure. And so I was looking at, okay, is this the right thing to do? Is this insane, basically? And it was a little bit, but I felt like it was the right thing to do. And so when I applied, I kind of told my story. I said how I got into security and why it was different for me, and my motivations and kind of my purpose, which is I want to protect those that protect others. So, for example, one of our clients is in the healthcare space and they specialize in a certain area. And it's very fulfilling to be able to provide them a service so they don't have to worry about it. And so their professionals can focus on keeping people healthy, basically. Um, and so I applied and I got it. And then it was, I think, exactly 2 years later. So very, very recently, the TED team actually contacted me. So TEDx is independently established venues. And so they just use all of the marketing material and they use the platform so they can upload it to the YouTube channel. But TED, the actual overarching body, reached out and contacted me and said, basically to something of the extent of, this is interesting and relevant at the moment. We'd like to feature it on the main website. Which obviously I was very, very privileged to kind of accept that. I had to go through the process of evidencing everything that I spoke about, and then they republished it. And a couple of weeks ago, it was featured in Australian Parliament while talking about online scams. And so for me, to kind of go from pushing a boundary, jumping in the deep end, to seeing on the opposite side of the world it being used to support um, kind of defense mechanisms and preventative measures for online scams is everything I could ask for, realistically. And yes, okay, like some of the content now might be outdated or something like that, but that's always going to happen in this space because it moves so quickly
Mhm.
with whether if it's multi-factor authentication or artificial intelligence or whatever it is. But for me, it was very much jump in the deep end and what's the worst that's going to happen? Now, the worst thing that could have happened is I could have never done it again and it could have been absolutely horrendous. But for me now, it's effectively opened up a new stream of work because I'm doing a lot more speaking engagements and going out to businesses. So for anyone that's keen to do it, sign up for the rookie tracks. Do what I did. Sign up for the thing that you've not done any research into necessarily, and try your luck, because I think the more you do at anything, the better you're going to get. And so I don't think you can expect anything your first time to be very good. And so the more you do, the more eloquent you'll get, and the more value you'll be able to transact to the people that are listening. That's a long-winded way of saying just start. Sorry.
Yeah, great advice. So, we kind of discussed the networking piece. So, what are some other tips? What are some other tips that we could give someone on looking for a job? You had experience looking for jobs yourself, as well as being a hiring manager. So, what's some advice you can give to folks that are looking for jobs?
That's a really good question. I think my experience of getting jobs or finding jobs has been quite unique because ever since my first one, which was the Skype piece, outside of working in retail and anything else, which helped me, I guess, to where I am today in some ways, I've known the person who's hiring. And so it really does feed into your networking piece for me specifically, because I wouldn't be where I am today by not putting myself that out there if I had been burning bridges or, I didn't turn up on the day kind of thing. And so it's really kind of seizing those moments and taking those opportunities and creating your own luck realistically, being in the right place, turning up in the moment and bringing in the results for whatever situation you're in. I think when I'm hiring for roles, other things people can do is show that self-starter, outcome orientated mindset. Now, what I mean by that is if you want to be a penetration tester, there is no single book you're going to read that's going to tell you every technique on Active Directory or cloud or how to, test Amazon Web Services or whatever it is. There just isn't. Or even if you're doing a gold build review or breakout test, like there's so much content, and some of it, well, will be outdated, and then there'll be new stuff coming along because you've got things like app blocker or whatever it is. And so you have to be inquisitive, and you have to want to understand that next thing in the technical pathway specifically. Like I can't really comment on um, GRC and information security and governance because that's not where I spend my time, to be honest. So if I can understand what that looks like and understand how someone overcomes a challenge, that gives me a bit more understanding into what depth people are going to be able to go to. And so something I ask in interviews is I'll ask a precursor question where it might be like, what was your favorite project in college or university? And they might say cryptography or whatever it was. Or what was a challenge you overcame in this circumstance? Or, depending on their experience, right? So if they've got experience, I would ask it based on a specific role. If they don't have experience, I would say, what was the thing that really got your light bulb moment? And so it might be that someone's on Try Hack Me or Hack the Box or Let's Defend, and they might have been doing a steganographic bypass or something like that. I'll then ask another specific question associated with that thing, and I'll expect them to be able to go into more detail. If it's a surface level answer, they've probably not persevered that much, because Philip, if I asked you about a challenge on a job one time, you'll be able to reel off, 25, and then you'll be able to go into, oh, it was that full stop or that colon or whatever it was. If you can then go into even more detail, it means you've either persevered and overcome an issue, or it's bothered you to so much extent that you've done so much reading and you understand it so much so that you've managed to get around it a different way. And for me, what that shows is that you're not going to give up at the first hurdle. Now, people might disagree with this, but that's something that I've always done, because when I'm hiring into a security operations role or a penetration testing role, you can't stop at the first hurdle, because if someone watches you do a pen test, the amount of things that you'll try that will fail, it will be so significant, because that's literally what you're doing. You're poking holes and seeing what sticks, and obviously you've got your methodology. And then within the security operations world, if you're a SOC analyst or a security engineer or a threat hunter, you're in an infinite game, which is, there is no definitive end. You're just always going the next day, the next day, the next day. And so trying to understand that when you're recruiting is really key. And it's really hard if you've got no experience. If you're new to the entry level roles, for example, explaining what that looks like is an impossible task. And so if people are on TryHackMe or whatever it is, whatever platform out there, it gives them a taste of some of the things that they're going to be able to achieve. Obviously, in those frames, there is an outcome that's expected. They just might not have got it yet. And then in the commercial world, there might not be. There might not be that thing that you're looking for in the needle in the haystack. And so it's kind of joining those two things up. So I try to ask questions in that way. Again, that was a long-winded way of trying to be very specific with certain questions to understand how someone's mindset works, before they jump into that role, basically.
So, what about you? Since you mentioned the SOC analyst uh, roles and stuff, and we always hear lots of great resources for the pen testing, offensive security side of the house, but you don't always hear a lot of resources on the SOC side. So, what is a good
Hmm.
resource for someone that's wanting to learn to be a SOC analyst?
Sure. I think, to be honest, understanding the offensive mindset is super valuable. If you know what Metasploit is, or you know what Impact it is, and Meterpreter, etc. If you become a SOC analyst and you see one of those things, you're going to know, right? Okay, that's a problem. I need to do something about it, even if you don't know how to use it. But my team recommend Let's Defend. It's very similar, kind of platform lab focused investigations, outcome based, gamified lab situations where you're looking for the certain artifacts, and they get the latest exploits or breaches uploaded quite quickly with the content, and so it's recommended significantly by the team getting into those worlds. There's also the vendor specific stuff. So if you're going to be moving into a Microsoft focused SOC, you can do the Microsoft security exams, which help you on the tool based knowledge. And so it might not be so much that you're going to understand the tools, techniques, and procedures that an adversary might take, but you'll understand, okay, these are some of the things, this is the process, this is how I isolate an asset, and this is where I investigate. But compared to the offset pathway, I think there is less. If you want to develop your KQL, there's Custo Detective Agency, which is something that the team use. So if you're going to use Microsoft Sentinel for your investigations, for example, that helps you write KQL to different levels of standards, and you get your badges and those sorts of things. So yeah, there's a few out there for sure.
So, we're getting down towards the end of the show. Is there anything you'd like to share that we didn't get a chance to discuss?
Just that I think what you briefly touched on, which is everybody's pathway is different, right? And putting yourself out there, making sure that you're networking and understanding where those areas are, even if you're not necessarily going to make a career out of that long term, can be very, very beneficial. For example, I bounced around and did all sorts of different jobs, and I did a bit of pen testing for a couple of years. I did a bit of investigations, and it's led to me kind of building out my own product suite around that experience. And so, for anyone looking to start, have a go at all of the online kind of labs and free tools realistically, because I think if you then know what you don't like, it's going to rule out some of those activities potentially. So yeah, I not necessarily that's that new, but I found it very useful, when navigating my career pathway.
Very cool. Well, thanks for taking the time to join today. I know this evening over there in the UK, but I appreciate you taking time to share your story and advice with my listeners.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you on the next episode.